wife and I live in a duplex in Queens, New York. Last month, two upper middle-aged women moved in next door. We never had the chance to greet them the first few days. They seemed very quickly in and out at first. On the fourth day, I caught one of the women carrying a box from her car into her side of the house, so I walked out to finally greet her. Her name was Frances, and she seemed normal enough, but she also seemed like she was in a hurry, so I didn't steal too much of her time. The next day was Christmas Eve, so my wife and I were preparing to host my sister and her families. During our Christmas Eve dinner, which was going completely normal, we all went silent and looked at the door when we all heard the sound of someone trying to push open the locked door. I got up and opened the door to see who it was. By the time I opened the door, there was no one on the stoop, but there was this woman walking down the sidewalk. I began to call out, but stopped mid-first word, deciding not to even bother. Maybe she had the wrong house, and that's what I said to my family when I sat down. Wrong house. My family all left around 9 that night. After that, my wife and I began our cleanup. I was mid-washing dishes when the front door opened and then shut pretty aggressively. In my head, it could have been my wife or any of my sisters returning because they forgot something. When I called for my wife and she answered from a different room, I knew it wasn't her. I turned off the sink, dried my hands, and then walked into the living room. There was a woman sitting in my big recliner chair in the corner. She was looking at the wall, muttering something to herself. I recognized her to be one of the women next door. My wife entered the room and gasped. I calmly told the woman she was on the wrong side of the house. Then she looked at me and continued muttering inaudible words. There was clearly some form of dementia. I told my wife to go hurry and knock on the neighbor's door. My wife left and was back with Frances surprisingly quickly. Frances seemed very relieved and grabbed the woman by the arm and pulled her off the chair and out of the house to their side. Frances came back a minute later to apologize and explain that her sister has what's known as sundowning syndrome, a form of dementia in which the symptoms get worse as the days go on. I asked a question I felt was rather important, which was, does she get aggressive at all in this state? I didn't like her answer. She said it's just best to leave her alone later in the day when she starts acting up. I wasn't overly friendly, considering I was pretty taken aback by what had just happened, but I wasn't rude either. Frances left, and my wife and I just looked at each other with this "what the hell just happened" looks on our faces. Anyway, this time, I remembered to lock the door. The next day, we went to my wife's parents' house for Christmas dinner. It was a nice time. We got home late since they live about an hour away, so I'd say we got home around 11. We cuddled up in bed and watched whatever Christmas movie was still on at that point. After that, our Christmas was over, and we cut the TV and went to sleep. My eyes opened to a dark room. I sensed I'd been woken up by a noise. I looked around the room and spotted her walking out of the room and into the hall. "Honey, are you okay?" "Huh?" I heard next to me in a groggy, half-asleep voice. My wife was still laying next to me in the bed. I leaped out of bed, looked down the hall, and saw the tall, lanky figure of who I could only assume to be that woman from next door. She noticed me in the doorway. I yelled, "Wrong house," before slamming the bedroom door shut and locking it. I heard her march down the hall back to her door and try opening it. She tried pushing and shoving the door, making these weird angry noises. I called the police and said our new neighbor with dementia had broken in and might possibly be violent. I also requested they ring the neighboring door to wake up Frances and get her to come in here. Waiting for the police was a miserable, nail-biting experience. When they finally did come, I left our room and went to the front door to let them in. Frances came in with the police, extremely worried and apologetic. Her sister was walking around in our basement all confused like. Frances took her back to their side once again, then came back out to talk with the police and I. She expressed sincere sorrow and gratitude for me not hurting her. I told her firmly this was not okay, and warned that if this happened again that I would consider pressing charges. From that point on, we obviously locked everything including windows. Frances' sister eventually went to go live with their mother instead. Thank God for us. Three years before I was born, my mother and father had their first child. He lived for a mere 7 minutes before his breathing stopped and he died. I have never inquired as to what caused him to stop breathing. A little over a year after this terrible incident, my parents had a daughter, and then 2 years after her, I was born. Naturally, my parents had no reason to tell me about my older brother when I was younger, and even as we all got older, the story was never told to me, presumably because it was too painful to recall. If the following events had never occurred, I might have never found out about him at all. In early December during my junior year of high school, the family gathered round the Christmas tree to load it up with the ornaments we had gathered over the years. Our family had continued to grow after my birth. My parents had added another son and daughter. My parents had bought each of us an ornament each year, so after adding those to the stockpile that they had owned before we were born, we always had one hell of a time fitting all the ornaments onto the tree. This year was no different. But we pushed, and we slid, and shoved, and eventually found some green for all of them. In addition to the ornaments, we had a fairly nice manger set that was placed underneath the tree. It had the whole damn birth party, and of course contained a wooden crib in which the figurine of baby Jesus lay. After my siblings and I had set this up, we stood for a minute or two and admired our work, and then we each went our separate ways and on with life. A day after setting the tree up, I walked into the living room to find one of my ornaments on the ground. It was the first ornament that had been given to me and had firstborn son etched into its face. The bright bronze had become cloudy over the years, but the ornament was sentimental, so it always managed to find a prominent place on the tree. I found the spot I thought it had fallen from and rehung it before walking through the room. I passed through the room the next day to find the ornament again on the ground, and again I hung it up. I tried to hang it in a different spot this time, assuming the weight had allowed it to slide from a thin branch, but to no avail, as it was on the ground the following day as well. I placed it back on the tree and was not too surprised when I came in the next day to find the ornament missing from the spot. What did surprise me, however, was that the ornament was not on the ground, but was instead sitting on the coffee table a few feet away. I assumed my mother was having the same problem with the ornament and had just given up and placed it on the table, so I stopped in the kitchen to ask her about it. She was doing the dishes, and when I asked, she turned around and with a funny look on her face and told me that she too had been picking the ornament up each time she walked into the room. For the next few days, each time I walked into the room, I continued to find the ornament off of the tree. But now the location had changed. It was no longer lying in a random spot on the floor or on the table like it had been before. Each time I walked in the room now, the ornament was inside of the roofed manger, leaning against the crib with the Jesus figure. I was young, and I'm sure that didn't help prevent me from thinking that things were adding up a little strangely. It seems really stupid now, but I grew up in a semi-religious family, and something about finding my firstborn son ornament leaning against Jesus every day appeared to me to be a harbinger of something evil that would come my way. The non-surprising thing is, nothing ever happened to me. Obvious, I suppose, but my dad, my no-nonsense get out of my face with your stupid paranormal bullshit, I'm just going into this scary dark room to get the toolbox, mysterious moaning to be damned, had something happen to him. He tended to work in his basement office until the wee hours of the morning. Most of that time was actually filled with him sleeping in his chair, as evidenced by him springing up and feigning awareness every time I would go into the basement late at night. In the early hours of the morning of December 23rd, he was, as usual, down in the basement. Around 2 a.m., he was awoken by footsteps crossing down the first floor hallway above his head. He decided he would come up and see who was up, and then continue upstairs to bed. He came up the basement stairs. He could hear the person walking through the kitchen on the other side of the door, but when he opened it, the person had just crossed into the dining room. He followed the steps through the kitchen and around the bend, but again was too late. The footsteps had beat him around the turn and into the living room. He rounded the corner and was surprised to see an empty room and no longer hear the footsteps. From the other room, they had appeared to stop at the Christmas tree. As he stood there, scanning the space and trying to figure out what he heard, he noticed an object lying on the ground towards the middle of the room. As he walked up to it and started bending over, he realized there were actually two objects lying in the middle of the living room floor: baby Jesus and the firstborn son ornament that was laying against its side. The next day, my dad told all of us the story at breakfast. My parents must have known that I was feeling a little unsettled from it all, so they decided to finally tell me what they had kept a secret for 16 years. They told me about their happiness at getting pregnant, the 9 long and exciting months my mom had carrying my brother, and their feeling of complete desolation and absolute loss when he died. They told me how it still hurt, especially around the holidays. At first, I assumed this was because everyone becomes sentimental around the holidays. Then they told me the real reason: my brother had been born and died on December 23rd at 2 a.m. Last night had been the 20th anniversary of his death. I guess I should start with my backstory. I'm a 13-year-old female, and I always loved Christmas. It's where families come together, people get presents, and most celebrate Jesus' birth. Christmas was meant for joy and wonder, but not this specific night. This is where it changed. Every year, my family celebrates Christmas at my grandfather's house. Unfortunately, he was growing old and couldn't live there alone anymore and had to move out. We convinced our family to have one more Christmas together. His neighborhood was very friendly and peaceful, or so I thought. On Christmas Eve, we went out to the mall to get our food. I usually go by myself to order food, despite my anxiety and social problems. I was ordering a sub when I noticed a tall, greasy and weird-looking man sitting on a table. It's bad, I know, but I judge people a lot, and always get bad feelings due to their appearance, but I try not thinking of it. I ordered my sub, and when I turned around, I noticed him staring at me with no emotion. I gave him a disgusted look and walked off. I probably shouldn't have, because everyone stares, and some might not even notice. I found my family and we ate together. When we got outside, it was dark and packed with cars. Before I got in my car, I saw the same man parked on the opposite side and a few cars down. Of course, as cliche as it sounds, he was leaning on the trunk, staring at me and my sisters. They didn't notice him staring at all. Just from that unnerving stare, I could sense he was a pedophile. From the way he looked at us. I know I always get self-conscious and overprotective, but I just hated the way he stared at us. It bothered me. Deep down I knew there was no way he lived in our neighborhood. When we got back home, we stuck to playing video games, watching movies, and all that good stuff. It was nearing midnight when we got a knock at the door. Who the heck would knock at our door at this time? Our parents were in bed, and they were always grouchy when awoken, so we decided to deal with the situation ourselves. Kayla, the eldest of my sisters, went to check who was knocking. She didn't know who it was, and asked if anyone else did. My heart sank into my stomach when it was the same freaking man. I was infuriated and terrified. I knew some karate, but we didn't know if he was armed or not. The first thing we did, but shouldn't have done, was tell him to screw off. My younger sister, Olivia, called the police. The man didn't go away and started banging on the door loudly. We were all screaming and freaking out and went to hide in the kitchen. We all were armed with large kitchen knives. Olivia actually started crying and couldn't bear the thought of him breaking in. The banging got louder and louder, until eventually, it stopped. We all were silent and shaking like crazy. I went to go look out the window and fell back screaming when he was standing on the other side. He was armed with the biggest knife I've ever seen. We gave away our positions by screaming so loud. He broke the window, and our parents came rushing down. Kayla, out of fear and rage, actually stabbed the guy in the arm, causing him to fall back in pain. My dad quickly rushed out the door and knocked the guy out by punching him non-stop. We all hugged each other as my dad called the police. He was arrested, and apparently charged for following and kidnapping young girls, but none of us cared. We were just happy to be alive. I'm actually glad my grandpa doesn't live there anymore. This happened back in a magical, delicate age where I still believed in Santa Claus. It was Christmas Eve night, or technically Christmas at that point. The time, I have no idea. All I know is it was late, and everyone in my house was probably asleep. I woke up randomly. To what, I don't know. I was probably extremely thirsty. I had to get out of my bed and walk all the way downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. There were night lights on in the living room and the kitchen, so I didn't have to turn on any lights to see where I was going. Whenever I was thirsty when I was a little kid, I'd always decide to finish the glass in the kitchen instead of bringing it up to my room. I don't know why, just one of those stupid things I did as a kid. As I was sipping the water, I heard noises coming from down in the den, which is where we had our Christmas tree. It sounded like a big bag. I peered my head around the wall, leading down the stairway to the den, but it was a little too dark to see who could be down there. I actually thought it was my mom, so I started walking down the stairs, and the rustling of the bag stopped. I turned on the couch side lamp, and there I was, greeted with a massive man, both in height and size, wearing a red suit and hat and a familiar long white beard. It was Santa Claus. He waved me over, and I nervously but excitedly walked over to him. He patted my head and said he was just delivering my presents from his black bag. I looked at the bag, which seemed to be full of small boxes. I tried to get a peek in the bag, but he stopped me and said, No, don't do that. It's a surprise." I noticed there were some presents already under the tree. He turned me around and whispered in my ear that I need to go back to bed. For some reason I didn't go. I just turned around and kept looking at Santa, Eventually, he started walking me up the stairs, telling me we need to be quiet. He asked me which way my room was, and then he told me to go up the second flight of stairs. That was when I actually obeyed him. I looked down the stairs when I was at the top, and all I saw was the eerie figure of Santa Claus looking up at me. I realized he turned off the nightlight as I was walking up the stairs. I went to my room and shut the door, excited that I just saw Santa. As I tried to fall back asleep, I heard a loud bang from downstairs in the den. The sound traveled all the way back up to my room. I assumed that was Santa leaving the house. The next morning, I woke up early to my mom's screams downstairs. I ran down to the den where my mom and dad already were, to a disturbing and confusing scene for my young self. There were no presents under the tree, and the sliding window was broken. I don't mean the glass was shattered, I mean it was slammed so hard it got knocked off the sliding mechanism. I confusedly asked my parents what happened, and explained that I saw Santa last night. When I told them this, they frantically tried getting as much info out of me as possible. My dad called the police, and when I asked him about this story for fresh details before writing this, he said the 911 operator said on the line that 2 other calls for the same incident had come in that morning. Apparently, a man dressed as Santa Claus was targeting certain houses with accessible windows, and he was stealing the gifts under their Christmas trees. I believe there's a special place in hell for that man. My parents had to tell me later that day that Santa isn't real, and that should anything like that ever happen again, not to trust it.